Hi there, it's David Wills at TED-IELTS again. Today we're going to do a video that explores maps and IELTS writing. As you may know, in IELTS writing task 1, you might have to describe a map of some kind. We can see here that there are different kinds of maps. So this one, we have two clearly different maps of the same place, and if you look at the top one you can see it's very simple, and then down below it's become a bit more complicated. It's because some changes have been made. This is a very common type of map to occur in the exam, so you might be asked to do this. We can see another one here. The picture quality is not so great, but you can see essentially it's the same. We have a town, and then in the next map you can see the town has changed over time. You can see in this case actually it says this is the town now, and then the one below is later, after a period of development. So this is different from here, the first one we looked at in 1950 and then now. So notice that you would have to use slightly different language for this, whether you're describing something from the past compared to the present, or something in the present compared to the possible future. So those are two types of maps. Both of those were about towns. You can see here though that we have a sports center. And in this case, it's basically the same, but instead of a big area of land with lots of buildings, it's one single area of land. In this case, a sports center with some tennis courts outside. You can see another version here. We've got two parks, so bigger than a building and smaller than a town. We have the park. In this case, we can see the park 100 years ago and then today. So we have lots of different features. You don't really need to know the names of anything because as you can see, it's labeled here. We have the fountain, we have the stage for musicians and so on, and the water feature. So all of these are pretty similar, right? Well, today we're going to look at something that's a bit different, and it is this map. So you'll notice first of all there's just one map. There's not two. However, this is still a question of the past and the present. So we still need to think about these ideas when we're doing this. And we can see here that we are looking at a town called Charliewood. Strange name, but I think it is a real place, near London. And we're starting in the middle of the 19th century, so like 1850 or thereabouts. We can see the details later. And we're bringing it up to more or less the present day. In this case, we're looking at a village that over time has grown and grown into a bigger place. So when we first look at this sort of question, we should, I think, read the question, as you might call it. There's no question mark, so it's not really a question, it's an instruction, I suppose. Because sometimes this gives us some important information, and if you don't read it, it can be quite difficult to exactly understand the information in the map. So here, Charliewood is a village near London whose population has increased steadily since the middle of the 19th century. So this is our background information. Do you need to know this? No, not at all. This is not going to be something that you write about. Some people might be tempted to have an introduction. I think it's a waste of words, to be honest. So the map below shows the development of the village. Yep, that's telling us some important information, but we don't need to say that. If you write the map below, you will probably not get such a good score because it's factually incorrect. On the answer paper, the map is not going to be below your answer. It will be on another piece of paper. So that is the information in the question or the instructions. Now we need to look in more detail at the actual map itself. For that, maybe we can zoom in a little bit here. So looking down here, we have to first, I think, identify the original features. So in those other examples that I showed you, this was quite obvious because you could see the original features because there's two maps. There is the first one and the second one. So let's put this down as a procedure. So first of all, you read the instructions. Oh, I'm hitting the wrong keys today. And next, we're going to find the original features. So I've titled this video describing a difficult map. And the reason is, this is actually a lot more complicated than other ones. And finding the original features is one of the reasons for that. So looking at this map, where is the village of Charliewood? Well, we can see that here. That is this little strange shape that we have on the left side of the middle of the map. So we should start with that. And we can see that identified because if we look down to the key or legend, there's two different names for that, key or legend, we can see that this is the oldest data available. This says 1868 to 1883. So we know from looking at the original data that there was a village here from 1868 to 1883. And we know that this main road that goes past it in a sort of north to south line, and that this main road that goes in a east to west way, that they have no dates. So they were probably around at the very first period of the information that we're considering here. So they were probably there during this 1868 to 1883 period. So you must find the original features, then you're going to see what has changed. So that is the important thing next. And again, it's quite easy to do this in most maps. The problem with a map is describing the information in terms of its spatial layout. Where is this? Where is this? What is this? In this map, we have another layer of difficulty. You have to find how you can see those changes and then how you can describe those changes. So we can look down to the legend again, and we can see that in 1983, we begin a new period of time, and that lasts until 1922, and that is this area beneath it, which is with the sideways or horizontal stripes. So we can identify that this was built next. So in our head, we should be thinking then, we've got the first village, and then it grew here, and then it grew here, and we can start to picture this. Once we can see it in our mind, then we can put it in English. So we have to see what is changed, and we have to think about the order of change. Then finally, we have to describe the changes, but only the important ones. So describe the important changes. Because sometimes if there's a lot of information on a map and you try to describe everything, you're going to end up with 400 or 500 words, and that's too much to write. So if we look then at this map, we can identify first you had the village of Charliewood, then the village expanded and became bigger. So that is the order of events. Next we come to the 1922 to 1970 stage, where it grew bigger and it grew out sideways. So when I say sideways, a more correct way of saying this is to the east and to the west. Because when we're talking about maps, we should use those cardinal directions: north, south, east, and west. So if we want to do this, then we can try to find the order of events, and let's do that together. Okay, so from 1868 to 1883, it was a small village located near or to the east of the main road. So, yeah, there we go. That is our starting detail. That's the first thing we would describe. You can then see from 1883 to 1922, it expands south or southward. And then from there, you can see 1922 to 1970, it expands east and west. So that is a good sequence of information. We can start to build our essay from there, but there's something else. In 1909, what happens? So during this second period here, we had another event. We can see down here, the railway was built. So we've got this railway coming through, and it is running adjacent to, and we can see this railway is coming through with the station being built in the slightly newer part of the town. I guess we can jump to the word town now, because village is the smallest type of settlement, and then town, and then city. Actually, a hamlet is smaller than a village, so a village is the second smallest. So it's worth mentioning the train here. So we can say 1909, the railway is built, and presumably the station is built too. Okay, then we get to the third section, and then we can see that in 1970 there was another event here, which was the motorway was built. And then that brings us to the final section, which is 1970 to 1994. There we go. And in that time, what happens? Well, we can see now the new areas that are built have been built over to the east of the map and around the new motorway. And that they're not just one unified area, there's several. So let's say scattered settlements. That word settlement, by the way, it just means a place where people live together. It's not a house, it's not a farm, it's a little bigger, so hamlet, village, town, city, megacity would be kind of that order. Now we have this order of information, we start to understand this difficult map. And when we do, then we can start writing, because you can't take too long to begin. Although I have taken a very long time to explain this. So we need to begin writing this, and the best way to do it is to start with a very general sentence. And that is something that will introduce the map. This map is a problem in several ways, because it's quite difficult. And one thing is that the information on the map is actually quite unrelated to what we need to describe. So you don't need to say that it's near London. It's not really of any information. You can say that, but you don't have to. You don't need to talk about the increasing population. It's not really relevant. You could put the information in, but I wouldn't start an essay with it. So instead, how can we start this? Well, we need to introduce the place and its name. It is Charliewood. It's also very useful that we talk about the time limit or the time period, and that's actually true for almost every IELTS writing task 1. If there is a time limit, it's very useful to describe it here. So we could say that it's from 1868 up until the last year, which is 1994. So that would be a good first sentence. So for a first sentence, I'm going to start with the map shows a town called Charliewood and its growth between 1868 and 1994. I think this is a nice broad sentence. It introduces the reader with an easy idea, with the key information, the name of the place and the time period. We've also said this is a map, which is important. It's not a line graph, it's not a bar chart. From that broad sentence, we need to refine the information a little bit now. And to do that, for IELTS writing task 1, we usually introduce an overview, which is the key information. This should have no actual numbers or details, nothing specific. And it should be the biggest, most obvious trend that you encounter. In this case, for any map actually, it can be a little difficult to find what is a trend with a map. And it can actually seem impossible to find a trend, but sometimes it's quite simple. In this case, the village got bigger. That's the trend. You could also say, the village has expanded, but also mention that there are now more transport links. Because in the first year, there was one road going north to south and one road intersecting it. Now we have a railway and a motorway as well. So I think that will do for our next sentence. Let's write this. Oops, that's not right. So the map shows a town called Charliewood and its growth between 1868 and 1994. The town grew significantly and several transport links were built over the period. This phrase, over the period, this is an example of referencing. It has the same meaning as 1868 and 1994, and it avoids me repeating myself and saying the same thing again. You can see as well several transport links, so rather than state that there were 2 extra ones built, I've just used a more general term. Okay, so once we've written that introduction, and 2 sentences is all you need, that's fine. Then we need to move on to the body paragraphs, and this is where we actually describe the details and the changes. I like to usually have 2 body paragraphs for writing task 1. The reason is, if you have 3, they're probably going to be too short and you've not developed them enough. If you have 1, it could work well, but it's not showing that you can divide ideas and reference as well as you could. So usually introduction and then 2 body paragraphs is the best way to do this. So where do we start for this? Well, we'll go back to the oldest things. So we'll start here with point number 1, which is the original time frame, the fact that this was a small village located on the east side of a main road. Okay, so there's my first sentence. Always check your answers for spelling mistakes in case you're typing too fast like me. So I've written the years first, from, to, and then we can have a comma after this. Always put a comma after an introductory or transitional phrase. That's an important grammar rule. And then that introduces my main clause. Charliewood was a small town by the side of a main road leading from north to south. You might be thinking, why north to south and not south to north? There's no reason. We can really say one or the other, but I think north to south sounds more normal. and which had a single east-west intersection located to the north of the village. So that is referring to this area up here. This is an intersection. So when you have two things come to each other and cross over, we call it an intersection, and the verb is to intersect. We talk about a line, and then this line intersects that one. Okay, so for the next sentence then, we're going to show the passage of time. Okay. So I introduced the passage of time again by saying this phrase here, over the next 4 decades. I could have said over the next 40 years, but it's just about varying your language and saying it in different ways, as long as you know it's correct. Again, the comma, which tells us that this was an introductory clause. I've said Charlie was greatly expanded. Why did I not say Charlie expanded greatly? This is the passive voice, and we use this a lot for task 1 because it's formal and because it's something that we use for procedures and things happening in that way. We use the passive voice when we don't know or don't want to say or can't say or don't need to say who did something. In this case, we could have said town planners expanded Charlie, but that's a really strange thing to say, and to be honest, there's more to it than that. When a town gets bigger, there's many things that cause that to happen. And so for all those factors, it's probably better just to use the passive and say it was expanded than to name those people. Or we say Charlie expanded, which is fine, but you're suggesting that this town had a choice. Like it's thinking, I want to expand, which isn't exactly right. So for a formal essay, I would probably say don't use that direct language. Moving on then, I gave it its location on the eastern side of the main road. So you can see it is here. We have north, south, west, and this is east. So it's on the east side of that road. This is just an extra detail for more impressive description. Then I said in 1909 a railway line was built through the middle of the new section of town. So this is the railway line here, and of course we know the date that it was built because we've put that in our plan. And I mentioned the railway station. We don't know when that was built. It maybe came later, but I didn't have to say that explicitly. I said giving Charliewood its own railway station. That's just some extra information, and we know it to be true. If you added too much, you could maybe say, and that same year it got its own railway station. That's not good because we don't know that to be true. Right, so it's 1909 and we need to continue our description with the next events. So after that we can see we pretty much skip forward to 1922 and the expansion going eastwards and westwards. So we can give information about that, then the motorway being built. So let's go back to that point again. I've said from 1922 onwards, so we're looking at the next section of time. But I just said there the town expanded outwards. Well, let's have these in the same form. The town expanded outward. I have used the passive voice previously, the town was expanded, and I can use that here again as well. So I can say the active voice, the town expanded outwards, or was expanded outwards. Either of them is completely acceptable. In this case, I think it sounds a little more normal when we say outward. to think about the town as doing this action. It is growing physically by itself, which is contradicting the previous paragraph, except that really this is about having a diversity of language, sometimes using the passive, sometimes using the active, as long as they've been correctly used. So I'll mention then that it's expanding out east and it's expanding out west, but I'll add that extra information. If you look at the railway line here, you can see there's nothing growing on the north side of it, it's all on the south side. So that's worth mentioning here. I'll then say that by now the town, and I think it's changed from a village to a town, is many times its original size. Right, next sentence then. A half century later, it's another way of saying 50 years. A motorway was built, so we're using the passive form again. By who? We don't know, or we don't need to say. Was built to the east of Charliewood. We can see that here. It's very much to the east of it. Running perpendicular. So there we go. It's an interesting word. It means these two things are parallel and they're going along the same line as each other. Running perpendicular to the main road that passes through town and intersecting the east-west road to the north. So that is here, it is where it is intersecting. I guess this is a roundabout, but we don't know. It doesn't say, so I would not write that, even though it does seem pretty logical that it could be. Okay, we'll move on. Right. So we've got two motorway intersections. This is the one where this one intersects the road and this one is going over the railway line, probably over by the looks of things. And we can then observe that the two new settlement areas are around those intersections. And then we add that by 1994, which we'll remember is the end of our observations, that the town has now been expanded in all directions, right? So it's been expanded to the north, the south, the east, and the west. So that's basically everything we need to say, but I see one more thing. Right in the middle here, we see Charliewood Park and Golf Course. So that's worth mentioning, perhaps. So I think, even though this has been quite a long description, 198 words, I'm going to write one last sentence then. And so what I'll do is for this last sentence, I'll just mention that the unclaimed areas are filled in by park and golf course, as we can see there. So this is our description, and you can see that it pretty much matches this little plan we made here. And we've basically covered everything in this. If I was to read back through this, let's see if I find any typos or any factual errors. And first of all, I guess I do, because I've written that this is a town, and I suppose it is, but in the beginning it was a village. So you could start a big argument about that. Am I describing the town and it's changed from being a village, or am I describing the village and it's changed to a town? I think I'll stick with town, but I think both of them are potentially correct there. So when you finish your essay, what you should do is you should spend some time reading through it carefully and looking for typos and other mistakes. Okay everyone, this was a video all about how to describe difficult maps, and this is the most difficult one I've seen for IELTS, so I wanted to make this video for you. I hope that it has been useful. I do have another video about maps. It's much more basic than this. I'll put the link down in the description below. Don't forget to like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe if it was helpful for you. That's all from me. Goodbye.